right there, and would like to introduce you to our host presenter tonight, Ryan Sowers, who is going to take it over from here. Ryan, it's all yours.
Hello, everybody out there in the piano world. Thanks for showing up. My name is Ryan Sowers, and I'm a recovering aural tunaholic, is kind of how I think of myself these days. Because when I first got into this, I was just zealously committed to aural tuning. I thought that was the only way to really do it. If you needed one of those electronic tuning devices, it meant you weren't really a good piano tuner. So that was a prejudice that kind of got instilled in me. And then, but then, one of the things that actually really kind of shifted my thinking was getting involved with the Piano Technician Guild tuning exam. Um, of course, the aural tuning portion of the exam is the thing that really is a stumbling block for many people upgrading their membership. But yeah, and you see these very typical scenarios. One of them was the person who had become really good at using their ETD, who could come in and basically ace all parts of the exam, but then just blow the aural tuning part. Like they just were hoping they could do it, and they just didn't quite have a good strategy. And so what that did show to me is that you could actually do a pretty good tuning with an ETD. So you couldn't really argue, because then sometimes we'd have a guy come in to do it an all aural tuning, and and maybe they'd be super confident. Oh yes, I'm a great tuner. I have these great clients, and I really know what I'm doing. And then they come in and they maybe just barely squeak by with just barely passing the sections. And so then that makes it gives me the question of if you couldn't tune your own piano and you had to hire a tuner, would you hire the aural tuner who barely squeaked by on all portions of the exam and passed, or would you hire the electronic tuning guy who aced every single part of the exam, including the unisons and the stability, but just couldn't pass the aural part? I mean, it's kind of a no-brainer question. I mean, obviously, for me, I would hire the electronic guy, because I want those unisons clean. I want it stable. So the whole seeing that happen over and over again, it did soften me up to the idea that electronic tuning is there. It has some things going for it. Of course, aural tuning also has things going for it, and so that sort of got me thinking about this class, with the idea of the cyborg being a combination of basically you're using the machine to augment your human tuning abilities. So what we're going to try to dive into, I'm going to try to keep it pretty focused. We're going to try to keep moving. Is why be a cyborg? Because people do seem to kind of fall into two camps. I'm sure there's many people who do use both, but we're going to talk about the strengths and weaknesses of both methods. I'm going to talk about which ETD I prefer in my everyday work. We're going to talk about pitch, and we're not going to just talk about pitch in terms of A440. There's more to pitch than A. ETD pitch raising, I do it all the time. I never use the pitch raise program. What I call the foolproof high treble. The high treble is a challenging part for any tuner, and I have found a way that I like to use it that you might want to try. And not only is it good for high treble, it's good for other octaves, and it's actually good for tuning perfect 12s. And there we go. So, and of course, the whole purpose of any of this that we're trying to do is we're trying to gain accuracy and speed. So I find if the electronic tuning device helps me be faster and more accurate, then it's a good tool. In fact, there was a little quote I came up with that I wanted to share with everybody. ETD users lacking strong aural skills are missing an important skill, but aural tuners lacking an ETD are missing an important tool. So I really think of it as it's an important tool for an aural tuner to have, and the aural skills are an important tool for the electronic tuner to have. Because I think the combination, if you can combine those things to get through the tuning as quickly as possible, so that you, and here's the rub for me. Tuning at this point in my career is sort of I enjoy tuning, but it's sort of a necessary evil. I want to get through the tuning as much as possible so that I can get to the other stuff, which is like voicing, regulating, friction control, fixing squeaky pedals, cleaning the piano, sometimes just chatting with the client, getting to know them, maybe even giving them a practice tip. There's all sorts of things that go into a successful appointment. Tuning is really just one of them, and sometimes it's not the major one. So the idea is, if you can increase your speed and the quality of your work, the lowering the cost of the tuning part of it, then that gives you time to do more full service, which I'm a big proponent of. And I really have been thinking a lot lately about how tuning pianos, servicing pianos, is like playing the piano. It's not something you just learn how to do and then you're done. It's something you continue to explore and gain nuance over a lifetime. This is just a picture of Vladimir Horowitz, one of my favorites. And watching him play, he does these incredible concerts with so little effort, and that really does separate out the amateurs or the less experienced people from people who really take it to the next level. Are, can you do what you do? Can you get more done with less energy so that energy can be used to actually accomplish more? So let's talk about ETD versus Aural, the strengths and weaknesses. This is from my old, I used to read comic books as a kid, and they used to have these Atlas ads in the back. I was a 97-pound weakling. But anyways, what are the strengths and weaknesses? Let's talk about the ETD strengths. They're extremely accurate. Most of the ETDs have a readout out to hundredths of a cent. They actually are very good at picking up the very highest notes of the treble, where it's the most difficult to hear. They're pretty helpful if you're in a noisy environment like a stage where there's banging going on, or just if there's chaos. I find them a godsend occasionally. The ability to record and recreate custom tunings, that's something I played around with. I haven't been totally convinced that it's as great as I hoped it would be when I got into ETD using, but it's a thing. And this may be the most important part. It immediately shows instability. One of the interesting things about the tuning exam, when they were compiling statistics years ago, and I haven't looked lately, so this is old information, but it sounds true to me. And it was that, on the form, when you're doing the exam, the home office wants to know, did you do it all electronic? Did you use an electronic machine, or did you do it all orally? And there have been sort of trends. And one of the trends that we discovered was that the electronic tuning people who tended to score a little higher on their stability, and the aural tuning people tended to score higher on their temperament tuning. So those are just, and I think with the electronic tuning, because you strike the key and you're watching the display, and if it doesn't move, you just feel it just feels solid. But when you're listening is a little more nebulous, so I think there is something about that immediate feedback that the ETD gives you. It's helpful for stability. And of course, then some people get into the alternative temperaments. So if you have someone who wants that, it's a pretty easy thing to give them. Now let's talk about the weaknesses. Well, its very strength is its weakness. The fact that it does have a display that goes to hundredths of a cent is actually asinine. I can tell you again from exam experience, for unisons on the exam, for a perfect unison, you need to be within a 1 cent tolerance. So if you have two strings that are 0.9 cents apart, that's considered perfect. So I've measured a lot of unisons in my own tuning, and I think most experienced professionals are definitely within the half a cent tolerance. And I think about 2/10 of a cent is about the tolerance of what humans can actually perceive. I really think anything much beyond 2/10 of a cent it makes almost no difference at all. So 1/10 of a cent is basically means nothing. And you can sometimes with ETDs, you can move the DTD to a different location and easily get a different readout of more than 1/10 of a cent, and sometimes more than that. So the accuracy thing it's a weakness in a way, because you can waste time tuning a good note. Because and this is one of the myths of piano tuning, is that there actually is a optimal place for every note on the piano, that you can narrow down to hundredths of a cent exactly where each note needs to be. And that really is not true. Of course, tuning is all about windows of tolerance. It's about hitting a bullseye, and a bullseye is not in a tiny little spot. It's an area that takes up space, and anywhere within the bullseye is a bullseye. So, the thing about the ETD is it sort of does get people to start, it sort of forces people to want to stop that display on every note. And I think you can end up tuning notes that probably you could have just left alone in some cases. Another issue with the ETD is the display requires interpretation. And how are you going to interpret? If you haven't learned what something's supposed to sound like, how are you going to know that the machine is correct? Because most of the high-level tuners I know, like in the Seattle area, most of them are very good Aural tuners, and most of them use a nice electronic tuning device. But they will tell you that they don't always agree with the electronic tuning device. So sometimes they will tweak it. And I think sometimes those differences between what the ear wants and what the machine wants may come down to interpretation of the display, which is not static. Sometimes it kind of is. Sometimes it rises, sometimes it falls. You need having the ear sort of as a backup to give you a second opinion on what the ETD is doing is useful, and vice versa. The other issue I have found, because with the ETD, is with open unison tuning. Most of my tuning I tune unisons as I go along. It forces me to try to achieve the cleanest unisons I can, because you're using those unisons as a reference. And so the machine gets confused listening to more than one string often. Sometimes it does okay with it, and sometimes you get a misinterpretation. So I have not found the machine that great, because most of the time I have more than one string open. All right, so let's get into the weaknesses of Aural tuning. Octaves, I think, are challenging just to tune by ear. They can be complex. They're nebulous. You can get it close, but the one thing that you can find with an ETD is you can double check your Aural octaves. And I've surprised myself at how I thought I tuned a good octave, and then measured it with an ETD and found out I wasn't as good as I thought I was. The high treble can be just a real bear on some pianos, especially. And especially if you're getting older. I have friends who they use electronic tuning devices because they have trouble hearing the last 5 or 6 notes on the piano. I don't think you quite catch the little bit of drift that can happen after a hard test blow. There is an argument that maybe tuning aurally takes more mental energy that could be used for something else, perhaps. Difficult, noisy environments. The strengths. Steinway has their recommendation. I was going to read their little quote, if I can find it really quick. Steinway on their website, let's see. I can't find it in 5 seconds. I'll just make it up because I kind of remember the gist of it. So Steinway's on their website. Oh, here we go. It says, quote, from Steinway, who we all know is the god of the piano world. Of course, I'm kidding. Steinway is a very important company. I respect them a lot, but and their opinion is weighty, and it's especially weighty to clients. It's probably weighty more to the public than it is to the piano technicians. But they say Steinway and Sons stresses the importance of aural tuning. Developing piano tone is a mechanical and musical art. Solid aural tuning exercises and develops the musical ear, giving the technician a greater ability to master the methods used in tone building. And that is the basic argument that Steinway makes, is that getting to be a good aural tuner prepares you to do good voicing. And I don't know if it's still true. When I was at the factory going through the seminars back in around 2005, at that time, they still did not allow any of the tuners in the factory to use an electronic tuning device. Although I think Kent Webb had one, he probably used it, but I won't say that for sure. I think you learn aural tuning, it definitely gives you a deeper understanding of what makes a great tuning. Also, you're working in the real world. You're hearing the piano as the client is hearing the piano. You're hearing more of the same things. Now, this will be a little controversial, but it's been true in my experience. There's been some very important clients who I think would have raised an eyebrow when I first tuned for them if I had just got out the electronic tuning device and plowed through the tuning. Some of them now, years later, I've softened up and because now a lot of times I do get out my electronic tuning device, but 90% of my, or maybe I should say 75% of my tuning is still aural. I still do mostly the whole temperament, probably up into the 5th octave, and the entire bass is almost always by ear. I just find it more efficient. But then I've heard there's some clients who may not respect you if you don't have an electronic tuning device. It may just have to do with what their experience was. If they had an aural tuner who botched their piano, maybe they'll be biased against aural tuners, So that's just something to think about. But a couple very important clients I had appreciated that I had good aural tuning skills. This is probably my favorite, the ability to adjust your resolution on the fly. And this means, and I think of tuning in terms of resolution because, for instance, a master tuning that we do for the exam is a high resolution tuning. It takes a committee of 3 of us 4 hours to tune the piano. Now, you're not going to do that on everyday pianos for sure. So you're doing something less than that, And in some situations that I come to, if the piano has other problems that I think trump the tuning, I will cut back on the tuning. I might decide, maybe I'll just, widen my tolerances on the top octave and the lowest octave. I'll just be a little more forgiving, and you can really save a lot of time that way. And to me, that's where it's really at. Because the thing is, with a neglected piano, you can always tell the person, look, we got a lot done today. This is a really good start. A piano like this is inherently unstable. We really need to come back and do a really good tuning in several weeks or a few months or whenever you're ready. If you have good aural strengths, you can double check the ETD. And of course, it's necessary if you want to be an RPT, which if you're a professional, I think it's a good goal. I don't think it's the end all of end all for sure. But I think most people who go through the process don't regret it. They're happy they did it. And I've never met an ETD user who studied, practiced, learned to orally tune, and then passed the exam. I've never met one who wasn't very proud and thrilled of having done that. And this is also very important, the ability to touch up a tuning. I've gotten kind of obsessed with this idea the past several years, and I kind of want to work on a class just on this topic, but not something you actually hear talked about, but it's something I certainly do. And it's certainly something that concert tuners do a lot. I don't do much concert work. There's just the area I'm in, there's not a lot of venues. I mean, I tune for a few small concerts, but it's not like Benaroya Hall in Seattle where it's getting tuned several times a week and sometimes multiple times a day. So those are obviously not full tunings, and they're not necessary. So, but the ability to listen to the tuning as more in a musical way and be like, okay, this tuning's pretty good, but the low tenor's a little off. I can fix that. Okay, I think with the 30 minutes, I can really whip this thing into shape and get to the voicing and regulating other things. Okay, let me just keep checking my time here. It always goes by faster than I think. Let's see. Okay, so TuneLab is actually my ETD of choice, and it really comes down to two main things. It's not that I don't have a lot of respect for CyberTuner. In fact, my mentor who gave me my initial tuning lessons, Mitch Keel, he was an Aural tuner. He taught me Aural tuning, and then it was right around the time CyberTuner came out. He was on the beta testing team. Ended up writing the manual for the first CyberTuner. Fell in love with it, and he's never gone back. TuneLab was kind of at the time considered sort of the poor cousin. It was sort of not as flashy as CyberTuner, but for me, for an Aural tuner who's wanting to adopt electronic tuning, I find it a very practical device. One is the cost. That's a huge, because last I checked, CyberTuner was at least $900, and it's maybe a little more now. Plus the yearly subscription fee, I can't remember, which is maybe $75. I can't quite remember. Anyways, there's a subscription fee, and more power to them. It's a great program. Many high-level professionals use it. I don't mean to disparage CyberTuner at all. And if I was probably strictly electronic tuning, that's probably what I would invest in. But the fact that I have this hybrid approach, there's some things about TuneLab that I think the other softwares don't do. The other thing, for someone who wants to explore, TuneLab is the only one of the, I see the heavy duty professional devices are Verituner, CyberTuner, and TuneLab. Now, there may be some others out there, so I don't want to say that those other ones aren't any good. But these are consistently the three that I see real professional, hardworking piano tuners use all the time. And TuneLab's the only one that has a shareware version for the Android only. Apple, there's not a way to do shareware, but if you have Android, you can get a shareware version directly from Robert Scott's website, tunelabworld.com. And so it's fully functional. It just shuts up for a couple of minutes after you tune maybe 10 or 12 notes, and you have to pause, and then it'll start working again. So I literally played around with it for a year before I bought the license, because I didn't really need it. I could tune aurally. So when it shut off, I'd just go back to tuning by ear, and then I'd use it again. And it was a great way to explore it. But more importantly, even than the cost, really it comes down to the spectrum display is probably the most useful part of it. So how I use TuneLab in everyday work. One, it's back to this pitch idea. Often, when I was younger, I used to just check pitch. My habit was just to check A and sort of make a whole assessment of the piano based on that, and of course A can be an anomaly. Maybe A is a low spot in the scale. Maybe it's a high spot, maybe A is right on, but it's really important now. My thinking about pitch is, since I float pitch all the time, I don't really care for A to be precisely at one particular point. I want to see how it is relative to the next A up, the next A up. I want to know where is the entire bass sitting a little lower? Is it a little askew? How wacky is the low tenor? So there's all these. So pitch is really something you have to really think about the entire compass of the piano, not just at A. I find the way I use TuneLab, the spectrum display for these uber fast pitch raises, I do it all the time. I love it, and I'll talk about it more in a little bit. Foolproof octaves, especially in the high treble, and that's actually a pretty basic concept. A lot of the stuff, I don't know if people are already familiar with the software. It may not be any news, but I have gotten very fond of using it for especially the top octave. Pitch. This dude, I can't remember his name. I found his picture. He's the guy who invented the tuning fork in the 1700s. He was a horn player for Handel, I think. Can you imagine inventing the tuning fork? All right, so pitch is not just A4. Every section of the piano has pitch. Pitch is malleable. And if you don't think it's malleable, you should come back and check your tuning after a week. I was doing a friend of mine was doing a recording project. She was doing, weekly recordings. And so I would show up at her house in the morning and do a fresh tuning for a recording. A piano can easily drift half a hertz in a week. It can go from 440 to 439.5, from 440 to 440.5 easily in a week. So, for everyday work, for people who are only getting their piano tuned once a year, once every couple of years, or once every 6 months, the pitch is moving all the time. So to obsess about it being 440.00, who cares? An ETD is a very quick and efficient way just to play notes, and TuneLab, the latest version, you can put it so that it recognizes what note you're playing across the whole compass of the piano. You can just quickly see where the notes of the piano are lining up generally with the tuning, the TuneLab. And most of the time, I'm just using the average tuning that TuneLab has as a default tuning. I'm not doing custom measuring of the tuning. I really just want that average. I just want to have something generally to compare where my piano is starting to the average tuning, because I haven't had great luck with the measuring the tuning, having it calculated. I just don't always agree with it enough, and maybe I'm doing something wrong. But so when it comes to the pitch of the whole piano, you got to think of the tuning as like a landscape, and it has high spots and low spots, hills and valleys. And what you're trying to do is work with that landscape to create a beautiful tuning. So you're trying to just level things out. You want to bring down the peaks and fill in the depressions somewhat. And sometimes if you're right before, let's say that the humidity is going to be coming up, maybe you'll leave the low tenor a little flatter if you're coming out of the winter and it's going to be coming up. So you can sort of work with the shape of the tuning. And that's all relates to sort of the pitch of the piano, not just A4. And if you regularly take a look at the sort of landscape of the tuning, you'll find that there'll be some areas that are actually maybe pretty good. There'll be other areas that are not good. And that's where I think it's really good to get your head wrapped around, is where can you put your effort to get to the best tuning in the least amount of time. This might be just a quick, we haven't really taken any break. We've been going for about half an hour. Maybe I'll ask Bill if he has any questions he wants to field at this point.
Let me unmute well, I'm still not muted. So there are some questions, and I'd ask people to push them into, there's a couple of ways to do this. If you raise your hands, you'll go to the top of the queue. If you know how to do that on your participant list, you'll go to the top of and I can call on you there. Meanwhile, I'll look at the chat box. And the question here is, how do you check your Aural tuning against the ETD?
How do I check my Aural tuning against the ETD? Yeah, that'll actually that'll come up in a little bit, because when I talk about the foolproof octaves, that'll make that clear. So that question will get answered.
That question will come up later. And it sounds to me like the next one will also do that, because it has to do with cutting time in your lower and higher octaves. So I'm guessing that's going to come up. I think you answered about floating around A440. So I'm assuming you do it above and below. Could you quickly explain how to tune P12, the P12 tuning with TuneLab?
Oh yeah, that's probably Christine asking that question. We've been talking about that.
Nope, it's not.
Oh, it's not. Okay. That'll come up towards the end, actually. That kind of fits in with foolproof octave tuning.
Okay. And I think,
So that gives people a reason to stick around.
yeah, it does. I'm guessing that to float A, that's going to come.
Yeah, I think I have a slide. I'm trying to remember, but basically here, let's see if I have a that's coming up here. Oh yeah, when it comes to pitch, be flexible. That's yeah, it's coming up.
Okay. So we'll skip over that. Um, if you, here's one, when your ear and the machine tell you different things, how do you decide which one you want to go with?
Generally, it probably depends on the area of the piano I'm in. Probably 90% of the time, I'm going to trust my ear as sort of the ultimate thing because that's what the client's going to hear. Uh, when you're dealing with the very highest notes on the piano, I'll be the first to admit, I think the machine does a better job, so I'd be more likely to trust it. But there are some exceptions to that. But generally, I trust the machine pretty well on that top octave, and I have gotten fairly used to being dependent on it up there. Although I still force myself to, in some occasions, not use it just to keep my skills up. But
Okay.
hopefully that's a
I
good
think
answer.
I'm not sure what that was. I think the next one, you said you mostly use the average tuning rather than taking readings from it, right?
Right. Yeah. Because I just find again, I'm just looking as something to compare to.
Right.
It doesn't. I'm not comparing anything to perfection, anyways. I've just run into problems with, and he's developed that program more, and maybe with the new split level or split, 3-part tunings. I just get impatient. I have my sort of system. It works for me. I find I don't need to do it, and it would just take more time, and it's not necessary. So that's probably why I don't use it.
Okay. Um, and to Chris, yes, we are recording the class, so it will be available later.
Okay.
Okay, that's all I have in the chat box, and I don't see anybody's hands. So
Okay,
press
great.
on.
So back to this idea of being flexible with pitch. And I have found this to be a little controversial, which kind of surprises me. But now I can understand that in certain situations, um, for example, you do have to be aware of your client's needs. Maybe there is a need for the piano to be at 440.0. I think that's a little unusual, but sometimes it is. Um, and you also, it's good to be aware of your climate patterns where you live. Some people have very extreme switches between winter and summer. We're considered a very mild climate here in the Pacific Northwest. I'm an hour south of Seattle. We generally fluctuate between 35 is about the lowest I see it in the wintertime generally, and then maybe 65, 70% at the most. And a lot of times it's between 45 and 55, 40 and 60% is sort of a typical window. And that's still enough to make the pianos go surprisingly out of tune. So I can imagine other parts of the country must be horrible. And then you also just need to be aware of what reasonable tolerances are. Again, coming back to the tuning exam, that they're in the middle of the temperament. You can be is a good scent that you can be off and still be considered to have a good score. So and then those tolerances get wider as you move up into the high treble and into the low bass. So there's quite a range. Basically it's like almost a 12-cent window by the time you get to the top octave on the PTG tuning exam. So it can be, I think, 5.9 cents sharp or 5.9 cents flat, and that's considered perfect. So that's quite a range. So again, there's not one specific place that is in tune. It's a window you're trying to fit into. So it's kind of the same with pitch. And this is to answer that question. This is generally how I feel about it. I'm very comfortable if it's winter and the piano's at 439.5 and the tuning is pretty good. There may be a whole section that I don't even really have to do anything but maybe tweak a few unisons. and maybe change the low tenor just a little bit, so, so that would be the winner. I'm okay with it being a little flat. Maybe you're not, but then I would ask you, okay, what would be acceptable? Would 439.8 be acceptable? Would 439.9? If the whole piano is at 439.7, are you going to tune every single note on the piano if the tuning is actually pretty good? So, because I think it is possible in our field. It's one of the big criticisms I have about our field in general is the overemphasis on tuning. And it's not that a beautiful tuning isn't important. Of course it is, but not if you. I mean, I just think it's possible to come to a piano that's already in good tune and spend an hour to an hour and a half tuning it, and basically it sounds almost like it did when you started. But you felt like you tuned it because you made the display stop on everything, and then you didn't have any time to do voicing or regulating or anything. We had a topic about pitch at a chapter meeting. A retired concert artist, technician, did a lot of tuning for concerts. Yeah, he said 441 is not bad at all for concerts. And there are orchestras that tune to 442. I've heard you get over to Eastern Europe, 443, 444. So it's not as malleable as, or not as strict as people might think. And of course, 100 years ago, there was the French pitch you see printed on Chickering plates where it says A equals 435. So pitch has changed over time too. So this is back to now, how do you, this is one of the first things that I wanted to talk about as far as actually using the ETD is tuning what I call the foolproof temperament octave. And I'm talking about just the octave, because that's really almost a really important thing. It's one of the frustrating things I had with using the calculated tuning on TuneLab. I wasn't always happy with the octave, how the octave was coming out. But here's a way you can just override the program, and you use it in what I would call manual override mode. Let's say you're going to tune C to C. I mean, normally I would tune F to F, but it doesn't matter. Let's say we're tuning middle C to high C is going to be a temperament octave. So what you want to do is just set TuneLab to listen to the next C up. So you'd be setting it to listen. So you want to tune C3, or let's see, in this example, it would be C4 to C5. You would actually set the machine to listen to C6. So it's listening to C6, but you're playing C4 and C5, and you're watching. So what you want to do is you zero the machine out so that when you're playing C6, you adjust the display to stop on the pitch of the note on the piano, and then you play the notes of your octave. Because then basically what you're doing is let's see. Let me back up, because I think I said that wrong. Okay, you're listening at C6, and you play C4. Okay. And what you're doing is you're listening to that fourth partial of the C4. And this was always hard when you start talking about tuning. The jargon it can be confusing. I'm trying to keep it as just plain as possible. You're playing C4, you're listening to C6 with the machine, and you're zeroing the machine out on that fourth partial. Okay. And then you play that next C up, the C5. And then you use that, what you've just calibrated your machine to do, you're using that to tune the upper C. And basically what you're doing is you're locking in those two partials. You're locking in that 4/2 octave, which maybe you don't, that would be how you would do a pure 4/2 octave, is you would stop the display, listening to C5, stop the display on the lower C, play and tune the note to stop the display on the upper note, of the octave. And then if you wanted to make it a little wider, you can tweak the sense. You can make it 1 cent wide. You can make it 2 cents wide. Because a lot of people do want their 4/2 octave. Maybe they want it a little wider than a 4/2. But it gives you a tremendous amount of control over that. So I do use it for that occasionally. Although a lot of times I still do it by ear. But someone asked me, how do you double check yourself? And this would be one way to double check yourself. Although sometimes, what I find is if I make it a pure 4/2, sometimes my ear does want it just slightly wider of a 4/2. So, but it's a very quick way of getting that initial octave very close, so then you can start filling things in. So the main thing is you're using that that note that's in the octave above the octave you're tuning as the reference pitch. Now, the pitch raise without a program, this is really probably the most important part of this whole presentation for me, because this is what I use it for the most, that and maybe the top octave on the piano. But I used the pitch raise program quite a bit when I first got the license, and then I just, it's okay. It gets things close. But the way I use it is I use the spectrum display on TuneLab because I find it just so intuitive and it goes so quick. And the idea is that, you know, for people who are not familiar with TuneLab, this is the basic part of the spectrum display. I kind of got the rest of the stuff off the screen just to simplify the view here. But we have a red line in the middle that shows what the target pitch would be. And then the green lines on either side of that. And this is what's called the zoomed in screen. That's 10 cents on these green lines on either side. That represents 10 cents to the flat and 10 cents to the sharp. So that's a 20-cent window that the red line sits in the middle of. The number in the upper left that looks like plus or minus 50, that's showing how many cents wide each half of the entire window is. So this entire window from one side to the other side extremely is 100 cents. So that's that. Okay, so the basic idea is that let's say this little peak on here. So when you play a note, you're going to get a little peak. So obviously this is about 10 cents flat here when I play this note. And if the unison's off, it won't be quite as sharp a peak, but you can still generally get a sense of the space, how far away from the red line is the note. And so what I'm going to want to do is when I'm doing what I call the one string pitch raise, is I'm going to pull one string of the unison up to over basically 1.5 to 2 times to the right side of the red line as the note started out to the left side. So which means when I get through tuning, it's going to look a little bit like this. So I've pulled one string up. And that thing I like, oops, here I accidentally sped forward there a little bit. Okay, so there's what it looks like after pulling one string up. Let's see. Actually, I'm not ready for that slide yet. Here, so basically, the idea is that you're able to get the piano pretty close to what it needs to be tension-wise by just pulling one string up per note. And the thing that I think is so great about the spectrum display is that you can actually see more than one string at one time. So that the ability to visually see where your note is starting, take a guess visually how far you want to send a note sharp and just pull it up and then go to the next one and go to the next one. And you're just pulling one. I've timed myself. You literally can kind of do this in between 5 and 10 minutes pretty easily. Now here, the TuneLab has 3 levels of zoom. The plus or minus 50 cents, that was the showing the screen that's 100 cents wide. If you zoom out a little bit, now we're at a screen that's 130 cents to the left and 130 cents to the right. So this is a 260 cent wide screen. And now it has these 2 other green lines. This actually represents the next note. So if the red line is C, the green line to the far right is C sharp, and the green line to the far left is the next note down. Oops, I didn't mean to go forward yet. Okay, so if I'm doing if it's more of a bigger pitch raise, like, 30 cents or so, like this, like, I would want to not do a one string pitch raise, because you'd have to pull the one string up so far. It's not good, and you're certainly more likely to break a string on an old piano. So then I'll do what I call a two string pitch raise, where I'll pull two strings up, and I'll go about whatever the note started flat. I'll go kind of shoot for that same amount sharp. So, but do it with two strings. And it works out about the same. It just takes a little longer because you're doing two strings. So this is an example of a note that's around 30 cents flat. I would do a two string pitch raise and raise two strings up, not quite as far to the right. So you can see the two strings, the peak on the right side of the red line represents the two strings that I pulled up. The string on the left is the one I haven't tuned yet. But the whole concept is, then once I'm done with this, when I start actually, the next time I go through the tuning, I'm really just tuning it like normal, where I'll be bringing one note up a lot and then two strings down some. In the case of this two string pitch raise, and in the first example, the one string pitch raise, I'd be bringing one string up really sharp on every note, but then when I come back to do the tuning, I'll be bringing two strings up and one down, two strings up and one down, two strings up and one down. And it's amazing how it cancels out the drift. And like anything, it takes practice. You have to fool around with it. But I'm telling you, it's such a time saver. It's rare that I can get through major pitch raises in a decent tuning in an hour. And a lot of tunings I can get through in a half hour, 40 minutes, which when I started out, I was a 3-hour tuner for years. I could not get through a tuning in less than that. And, and these guys would say, oh, you'll get so you can do it in an hour and a half. And I just thought it was impossible, but it certainly is possible. Now you can zoom out one more level with the spectrum display on TuneLab. This is what I use for extreme pitch raises. Those green lines now to the either side of the red line now represent basically 100 cents. So we're seeing three notes on the screen. We're seeing C in the middle, and we're seeing C sharp, and we're seeing B to the left. So when doing extreme pitch raises, I turn off the automatic note switching because it's not very useful for when things are half step off, because the machine doesn't really know what it thinks you're on the wrong note. So here's the note again, that red line representing C4. So the green line to the left is B3, and of course the green line on the right is C sharp. So I would use this one screen to tune three notes. The screen is wide enough in sense that usually if I play B, it'll show up as a little peak on the far left, and I can pull that up to just a little above the green line, and I'll pull up all three strings just a little above the green line, and then I'll move to C. I'll tune all three strings up a little above the red line, and then I move to C sharp. I pull all three strings up a little above the green line, and I manually switch 3 times, toot, 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 and then I have 3 more notes I can tune. Pull it up, pull it up, pull it up. It's really the approach you have to have with these extreme pitch raise. You just got to pull it up, and with old pianos, it's not an accurate thing. You're just trying to get some tension on it, because then most likely, well, yeah, of course, you're going to have to go through it another time before you get to your fine tuning. So extreme pitch raises, I always think there's going to be the extreme pitch raise, and then it'll sort of get to the point I can do the normal pitch raise. So maybe the second pass, I'll be able to do the 1 string pitch raise, or maybe the 2 string pitch raise prior to my fine tuning. And on an extreme, again, this is just kind of what I would say, this is about how far I would feel comfortable pulling up 3 strings on an extreme pitch raise. Let's say it's a half step flat. So you can see the green line to the right of the red line is 100 cents. So if you had to guess, I probably went 20 cents sharp, on all 3 strings. So I tend to be a little conservative, because I'm in a part of the country where we have a lot of very old functional pianos. So the other day I tuned 3 pianos that every one of them was over 100 years old, and they were all serviceable. It was kind of crazy.
Ryan,
Oh yeah, go ahead, Bill.
okay, we probably don't have, anyway, the question is, while you're doing this, do you have any mutes in the piano at all?
No, no mutes. Good question. That's an important thing. That's another reason why it saves so much time. And with the Tune Lab and the Spectrum display, it hears. You don't have to have it muted out. You can just visually watch the string get pulled up. You know, you watch this little peak just slide over to the right as you go sharper and sharper, and then you just visually guess about, okay, that's about, you know, twice where I was before. You know, and you have to practice it to get a knack for it, but it's worth it because it saves so much time. And again, I'm not worrying about accuracy. This is not an accurate thing. It's a ballparking thing. And, you know, maybe one note you'll pull up and you're like, oh, I wish I'd pulled that one up a little more. Well, the next one, pull it up a little more. If the next one's just right, then good. If the next one you pull up too much, the next one pull up a little less. You just have to, you're trying to get an idea. You're just dealing with tension. It's not tuning. It's basically working with tension. Okay. So the whole point is speed. You just keep moving forward. This is one of my favorite quotes. You cannot make things foolproof because fools are so ingenious. But nevertheless, we will talk about this, the foolproof high treble, because this is the other thing I use the Tune Lab for a lot. So let's say I'm tuning the top C on the piano. What I want to do is I have the machine set to C8, and then I play C7. And then I want to match the machine to that, what the overtone that I'm getting off of C7. I use that in order to tune the C8. It basically is tuning a very precisely pure 2-1 octave. And the thing is, if you get in the habit of doing this, there's some pianos you can almost do it without even looking. You can just play, you can almost play the note by itself and you can move it around. There's a sweet spot where the note really starts to ring out. And it's that sympathetic resonance between the top note and the second partial of the bottom note of the octave. Because of those high strings are undamped, they can resonate, and they do resonate. They often resonate very noticeably. Sometimes not so much, you know. So it's kind of hit or miss. But you know, even on Wurlitzer Spinets, I've heard it where you're getting close to that 2-1 relationship, and you're watching the display while you're listening, and it's like ping, ping, ping. And all of a sudden, it starts to go ping, ping when you get in that sweet spot. To me, that's the very best place you can put a high treble note, because most of the time they just have trouble sounding like a note. So if you can get a little more sustain, a little more sparkle out of it, that's a good thing. Some people will say that's not stretched enough. I would suggest that they actually measure what the second partial of that lower octave is, because the inharmonicity is out of this world in that area of the piano, and it's the even just doing a 2-1 octave, the pitch of the upper note ends up way sharp than if you had just doubled the frequency of the lower note. So it's still a very stretched octave. Now, I have had clients who wanted to hear that sharper. You have to always accommodate the client, but you could use the same method. You can just adjust the display. You could say, okay, instead of 2-1 octaves, I'm going to do 2-1 octave plus 3 or 4 cents. So it allows you to very controllably decide what you're doing up there. But my default is 2-1, you know, because it gives me the cleanest sound. So again, you'll be the machine is let's see, you're playing the note, but the machine is listening to the partial coming off of the lower note. So hopefully that makes sense. You're playing the C8, the machine is listening to the it's always hard for me to talk about this. It's a confusing topic. The machine is listening to, it's calibrated off the second partial of that lower note. Hopefully that is clear. Now this picture is good because sometimes electronic tuning devices have a hard time hearing those partials. And this is just a trick I found pretty useful. If you're not getting a clear reading on that second partial of the lower note of the octave, And this is a particularly good example because this is the first undamped string. And I think that's where you really start to get that interaction between the upper and lower note of the octave, where that lower note starts to give reinforcement to that upper note, is that first string where there's no damper because it's free to ring. And this is I would suggest anybody try this because it's just kind of fun. If you've ever played guitar and tuned with overtones or harmonics, it's basically the same thing. You mute out two of the strings, and then you use a very thin, you got to have a very sharp edge, kind of sharp, flimsy edge on the end of a rubber mute. And you just kind of barely touch it, and you drag around and you play the note repeatedly, ding, ding, ding. And all of a sudden you'll hear all of a sudden that octave partial will just ring out. And then the TuneLab software, or probably any software you'd use, would suddenly pick it up much more clearly. So it's just a way of isolating that partial. You have to fish around a bit for it. You know, it takes a little. It does get easier with practice when you start to up in the. You have to find. You're basically looking for the halfway spot on the speaking length. It has to be the exact half spot. So, and this could kind of get us into talking about the other octaves, because the same idea of setting the machine to listen to a particular partial and then using that partial as a gauge to tune the note on the piano, that's sort of universal across the whole compass of the piano. For example, let's say you're tuning C6. You could play C5 and see what the display is doing, so you can see how the 2-1 octave is working out. You could play C4. This is all, the machine is set on C6. It's not changing. You're keeping it on C6. Play C5 while listening to C6. Play C4 while listening to C6 to check the 4-1 double octave. And it's interesting, it's very educational to watch the display, because you really get an idea of how the scaling of the piano affects the kind of stretch the piano wants. And then you could play G4 to check the perfect 12th. And I have used this quite a bit to tune perfect 12ths. You know, I've gone back and forth with perfect 12ths. I think they can work pretty well in certain areas of the piano. I don't think it works well globally, but I think it can. And the thing is, with any of this stuff, I think you can do it. I think it would be a rare person that would ever complain about it. But I think perfect 12ths are really great as you move in towards the 5th octave of the piano. I think they would be too wide for me once I get up into the high treble. But what's interesting about when you have the machine set, again, back to if we're on C6 and, you know, you've tuned that note, but you want to double check it against C5. You play C5, and if it looks like the display is all of a sudden now showing that it's going a little to the flat side, that's basically telling you that your 2-1 octave is a little wide. But then you may play the C4 and find that the 4-1 octave is not wide at all. And then you may find that when you play the G4, it looks like it's going a little to the sharp side, which is indicating that your 12th is just slightly flat. So you can very quickly kind of reconcile the octave, the double octave, and the 12th as you go through the 5th and 6th octaves of the piano. So it's kind of one of those things. It's hard to totally, you have to really get some practice fooling around with this stuff for it to really make sense. But it really gives you a lot of control. And it allows you, what I've sort of gotten in the habit of doing now is I kind of check those things and I find what I think is kind of a sweet spot between, you know, often the double octave and the 12th when I'm in the 5th octave. And as I move up into the high treble, I kind of taper off to the double octave. I want pure double octaves. And then as I move to the very top, you know, I'm tapering to single octaves usually. You know, this might be a good spot because I know that's kind of, it's abstract and confusing in a way to talk about this, especially if it's new, if it's a new topic for people. You have to get copy of TuneLab and you have to play around with it, but you're basically using TuneLab to listen to partials. And because it's very good at doing that. It can really pick up harmonics. Any questions, Bill, at this point before we get to the last few things? Because I know we're kind of getting to the end here.
Got, I was looking to see if there was anything you didn't cover as the questions were coming in. I think you addressed that. We did that. Do you find there's an advantage to or not to starting a tuning from the lowest tenor note or starting from A1? Or are there situations where you prefer one or the other?
Well, I think because I come from such a strong aural tuning tradition, my instinct is always to start at A and tune my octave and then tune the temperament and then expand that out from the middle. So I'm always pretty much going from the middle outward. And I know there's been some good arguments for starting at the bottom and going straight up. I've heard that can be good. So that's how I do it. You know, I think if you are an aural tuner who's looking to explore electronic tuning, I think kind of using your own the method you usually use, but then kind of start adopting listening with the machine as you go along can be a way to kind of get used to using the machine. But yeah, if you're already used to the machine and you're used to just going in a linear fashion from, you know, tenor all the way up to the treble or whatever, you know, yeah, it's just not how I do it. So,
Okay.
yeah, and I would say this class is probably, you know, one thing I could make more clear in the future. It's definitely more biased towards aural tuners who want to adopt ETD use. You know, there's probably almost a different topic how you could get ETD users to adopt aural techniques, but that's such a big topic, you know, because that would it's not really practical to cover that in the same class. But so yeah, so this last few slides, there's just a few other things that I think ETDs are useful for, which is the unisons that are tricky, especially in the high treble. And again, back to TuneLab and it's the spectrum display. Interestingly enough, the spectrum display will often show two separate pitches for one note. And I think it is, I wonder if a false beat actually is a string that's putting off two slightly different pitches. And that's why it's producing a beat. That something is off with the, you know, the termination point or whatever is causing. But anyways, people can debate about that forever. But one thing is you can see that there'll be two little distinct peaks when you're playing one string. And then you can, so I find that sometimes with the ETD, you can get better unisons by tuning each unison separately and try to make them all look as much alike as you can on this visual display. But sometimes you fool around with it, and sometimes the ear can sometimes do a little better job. So that's why ultimately it has to sound the cleanest. So you can use your ear to tune it. You can use the ETD, and sometimes you'll decide, yeah, I think I like the ETD. It's actually in the end, the proof is in the pudding. If the unison sounds better as after matching it than the string singly, then trying just to do it by ear, then that's good. But sometimes you feel like you can hit a sweet spot by ear that maybe the machine wouldn't pick up. It's complicated up there. It's complicated. There's the machine does not give you a clear readout, and your ear doesn't give you a clean out readout. But you just have to find the where it's the least bad sometimes, or at least as clean as you can get it. The other thing, this I do on a regular basis. You know, since I work on so many old pianos, I do come across old pianos with tubby bass strings. Had one of these, I guess it was on Monday. Just old piano, pretty good old piano, but probably its biggest weakness was its biggest weakness was the. Oh shoot! Let me turn this off. Sorry about that. Yeah. My mom is trying to call me. Maybe if I just turn this other. Okay, I got. I'll call. I promise to call my mom when this class is over. But anyways, it's something I will do in the course. Again, it's one of these things that I can do if I can get through tunings quickly. I will sometimes, before I even start tuning, I will go through the bass. I'll do an experiment. You take the tension off, and you whack the knob a few times, pull the tension back up. Sometimes it makes a really big noticeable difference in the tone of the bass strings. So sometimes, as I did on Monday, I took the time, lowered the tension, and twisted each string going up right down the line. And the ETD is very handy for immediately getting those strings back up, because who knows where the tuning is starting. Usually if it's an old piano, it hasn't been tuned in 20 years, it's a quarter step flat or so. But I can at least get a head start on the bass after doing the bass string reviving. I don't, as an Aural tuner, I usually rely on the temperament to tell me how I'm to get me to tune the bass, but TuneLab allows it to get it very close. Oh, and just one thing I meant to say earlier is, I really don't have any affiliation with TuneLab. So if it sounds like I'm selling TuneLab, I'm not. I don't have any professional affiliation with Robert Scott, other than I just appreciate his product. Now, just for a little homework, it's always good to have a little homework to do. So if you don't already have TuneLab, try the shareware version, because it is free and you can download it directly from Bob Scott's website. I know on Android phones, there's a setting. It doesn't necessarily like you to download things off a website for security reasons, but you can trust Bob. He's a good guy. And you can give it permission, and you can get that software right off his website. And the other nice thing about the Android version is, I literally probably have 4 or 5 old Android phones sitting around my house. For some reason, you upgrade your phone, you don't throw the old one out for some reason. And mostly I keep them because I figure, well, it might come in handy as a backup tuning device. So you can probably get old Android phones from friends or family members for free, and then you can get the software for free and try it out. So it's very low cost to getting involved and checking it out. So again, get yourself a copy of it, and just start checking the pitch throughout the whole piano. Don't just check the A, check all the sections, and try to find areas of the tuning that are salvageable, because that can be a real time saver. I had a piano today where really the whole 5th octave was pretty good, and certain areas of the 4th octave. Then it had gone, it was a little flat in the bass, and then for some reason the bass was a little sharper the rest of the piano, and the high treble was quite flat. So I did kind of a hybrid technique. I floated the pitch to match the 5th octave. I did a 1-string pitch raise on the top octave to sort of get the tension close, and then blew through the tuning, and had time to do some other things I wanted to do with that piano. And so it's important for if you're going to delve into full service, which of course I highly recommend. So, and I really hope that people give this idea of the 1-string pitch raise a try, where I actually did this before I even got into ETDs, but I found when I started using the electronic tuning device and that spectrum display, I was just able to do it a little more accurately than I could do it by ear. But I used to just do it by listening. I just pull one string up real sharp, going up very quickly, and it just makes things lock into place much quicker, and it seems less laborious than going through a whole tuning. It's sort of it sometimes is just like you tuned the whole piano, but you've only tuned 1 string per note. And I don't do the bass. I should have made that clear. When I'm doing the 1-string pitch raise, you could do the bass, but generally I find the bass it's not necessary. I do the bass so quick, yeah, that's a whole nother class, how I tune the bass. But and then I hope people try the uber pure 2/1 octave in the high treble, and really listen for that ring, listen for that sustain, and I think once you start hearing that, you'll get addicted to it, because it just makes those notes sound so clear, more clear anyways. And I think sometimes some of the tuning software, if you use the calculated tuning, sometimes it stretches them more than beyond that, which maybe is fine, but um, this is the sound that I've gotten that I really like. And that's it.
All right. So Ryan, we've got a couple questions here. One of them is probably two questions, um, asking what a normal tuning takes you, and I suspect that is not the same as how long do you allow for a service call.
Right. No, yeah, those are two very different things. So, yeah, service calls, generally just for marketing practices, we have a three-tiered system. We have what we call the basic, we have the tuning and maintenance, and then we have the extended or catch-up service. Basically, 1 hour, 1 to 1.5 hours, 2 to 2.5 hours, and then the extended service can even be 3 hours or more. And I'm trying to, I always try to keep the basic to 1 hour, the maintenance to 2 hours, and the extended to 3 hours. But you get chatting to people. I don't know. I'm not very disciplined. I always tend to run a little bit over. But anyways, so the tuning. So the basic tuning, or the basic service, that's mostly, I tell people, that's going to mostly just focusing on the tuning. And I try to get in and out in an hour if I can, which is almost impossible. But especially if you're, having to put tools away and talk to the person, make out a bill. The tuning itself, I can certainly do in an hour. It's the other stuff that ends up taking a lot of time. That could be a whole nother class. Efficiency and just putting your tools away. It drives me crazy. One of these days, I want to have an apprentice who can just be putting away all the stuff as I work, and I can chat with the client.
You interact with the customer and the client, right?
Exactly. Wouldn't that be sweet?
Yes, I totally get it. There's some other things.
So back to the time it takes to tune, but I will tell you, sometimes I can get through a tuning in 20 or 30 minutes. And a lot of it comes down to their pianos that I see on a regular basis, or I'm seeing them on a yearly basis. And of course, it's often true if you're seeing the piano. I just saw a piano yesterday. He's an old friend of mine. I can't believe I hadn't seen his piano in 3 years. He got a Mason Hamlin A, good musician. He's got a damp chaser in his piano. He finally decided it was time to tune the piano, but really the tuning, it was really a touch-up tuning. So he spent as much time reshaping the hammers as tuning. And I think that made more of a difference to the sound of the piano almost than the tuning did. But certainly the combination is wonderful. I do a lot of hammer shaping as part of my everyday service. So the tuning, I'm always just trying to get through it as fast as possible. Now, if it's an extreme pitch raise, still I can usually get through it in an hour and a half, but sometimes a string breaks and then you lose 15, 20 minutes easy.
That always flows.
That happened to me twice in one day,
Right.
Right at the end of the appointment.
Always.
Right at that very high treble.
Yep, it's always yeah, or the first one that's underneath the duplex.
Yeah.
Whatever. Okay. Max has asked a question here, which is really, I think we covered before, but it goes back to when do you start using your ear versus the machine?
Oh, yeah. Most of the time I tend to, it's almost I would say when it starts to become uncomfortable to use my ear, and that kind of varies from piano to piano. I've noticed. Like I said, pretty much the mid range and the bass is almost always by ear, and then as I move into the fifth octave, let's say the capo section, the first capo section on a grand, I might still continue to do it orally, just because if I still feel like it's all coming through very clear, you know. But then sometimes I do what I call, and this would be another thing maybe to add at a future version of this class, would be I guide the machine. So I have it set at the average tuning curve, and then I set the note exactly where because I can hear really well in that fifth and sixth octave, especially the fifth octave. I have no trouble. I just know, I know when a note is correct. I know the checks, and I just feel like, okay, I can trust myself. And then I see what the machine thinks, and the machine might be saying, Orion, I think that note's a little flat. And I'm like, oh, I know it's not flat. And so what I do is I just, on TuneLab, and it's nice to be kind of off the screen share in a way, because I was kind of wondering if I brought it up, if it actually would show up very well. Yeah, it kind of does. But on TuneLab, you swipe the display, and that's how you change sense. Is you just swipe on there, and you change the sense up and down. So then I just brush it a little bit, and I make it match me. And then that usually will work pretty well for the next few notes. And then I will and I'm always kind of going back and checking my, yeah, 17ths is something I use a lot. 17ths and double octaves as I move up into that, towards the sixth octave of the piano.
Always double checking yourself. That's the key.
Yeah, always double check. Maybe not even every note, maybe every few notes, just to kind of to see if I'm still synced up with the machine. And what I find is sometimes, like say Yamaha pianos, they seem so consistent. The scaling seems so smooth and consistent on those pianos. That's one where it seems I can just almost just go with what the machine says, and it's fine. But Steinway's other pianos were maybe, and this is my theory about why there's discrepancies. I think the machine assumes it creates a perfect curve and puts every note on the piano on that curve, but that's not the way the piano is built. The notching is not that precise necessarily. The diameters of the wires are changing every several notes. It doesn't know exactly where those diameter wires, those changes are happening. So I think that's why there tends to be, why the ear will sometimes make corrections over the machine, but that's a theory.
Okay. I encourage folks to look at the chat because a lot of questions are being answered there by other folks about where you can get manuals and stuff.
That's why it's good to bring people together, right?
That's exactly right. I guess Max was actually restating his question. He's wondering how much you trust the overpull ratios is what he's really asking.
Well, see, that's the thing. I don't trust the overpull ratios, and I don't use the overpull ratios. That's why I've gotten hooked on the one string pitch raise concept, because I'm really just using the geography of the display, and so if this is the red line and I place middle C and the note is showing up here, let's say here. And then what I do is I just pull one string up so it's here. So if it's here, I pull it up here. If it's really close, I just pull it up a little bit. If it's farther, I go quite a bit more. Of course, just being careful because I don't want to break a string. But this is really handy for like these, 5-cent pitch raise, 10, 15-cent pitch raise. You get so quick. And of course, the smaller the pitch raise, the more accurate it actually is. And so I find that I can just do that for the first 5 minutes of the tuning, and then I can get right into tuning the way I normally do. And so it feels like I'm doing a pitch raise in 5 minutes, which, would be impossible under normal circumstances. I used to see how fast could I do a pitch raise. And Jim Coleman Sr., he once told me he could do it in 10 minutes. And I don't know. I maybe tried to do that once.
That's kind of right along. Well, Ryan, I want to thank you very much for being here and our guest this evening.
No, it's good to finally see some faces. I was on. That's the one thing about the screen sharing. I didn't quite feel as personal, but now I can see everybody, and
it is.
I know there actually are some people out there. That's great.
There are. We had a high of 95, so that's very good participation. I'm real pleased with that. And of course, it is being recorded, and we will have, among all my other responsibilities and duties, I will eventually get this up into the PTG Academy online, where members can find it. So,
all right. Well, thanks for spending the evening with me, everybody. It was good to see some technicians in these isolated times, and maybe we'll see you all in July in Orlando, Florida, if we're lucky.
Well, it's actually the 4th through the 7th of August. So
August. I'm sorry, August is. So,
hopefully something will happen. Something will happen then.
So, Mr. Regional Vice President, after you just had the board meeting, is it looking hopeful, like they're going to be able to go through with it?
We are hopeful. I'll put it that way. We are hopeful.
Yeah, I'm sure hoping that. Yeah.
It's all at this point. There's no set concrete answer. That's the best. That's the only thing I can say.
So I do have 2 classes I'm going to be doing there, hopefully, which are probably not as dry as a tuning class. It's going to be voicing as part of everyday service, and regulating as part of everyday service, because a lot of the same things I was talking about with tuning can be applied to regulating and voicing too, where you got to get through it efficiently, relaxed, get your chops together, and how can you approach it to get to that beautiful tone, that nice buttery feel in the piano, that controllable action that feels like the hammer's at the end of your fingers. How do you get to that in the least amount of time possible?
Well,
That's
maybe I should talk to you about in March. I'm doing the series will all be about repairs, and in April the series is all going to be about regulation. So if you
yeah.
want
Those classes are. This was a prototype for this class. So I appreciate you guys being my guinea pig.
yeah,
The
there
other
you
ones,
go. So
the other ones are a little more well developed.
there we go. And you might
All
get
right.
another opportunity in April to do a prototype. There we go.
Sounds good.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. I hope
Thank
you all have
you.
a safe, good evening, and we'll see you at the next presentation.
Be well.
Be well.